Morning, students. So today, like I said yesterday, continue from constructor overloading. Okay, constructor overloading. We have already seen this from the beginning of the program. Okay, only thing is that we have not used this word constructor overloading. Okay, we have seen similar concept also under the word function overloading, right? And yesterday also we saw that in constructors and destructors, we had member function overloading, right? So the in function overloading you learn that the same function with the same name uh, could be called again and again provided the parameter types were different, right? And in yesterday's member function overloaded class member function, that is member function overloading, you saw that the same concept of function overloading could be used, uh, where again that the number of parameters also could be adjusted, right? So like here you could see that there were three member functions declared, right? All with different numbers of parameters. Here we have four parameters, that means four arguments could be passed. Here we have three parameters, so three arguments passed. Here we have two parameters, so two arguments could be passed. So depending upon the object call, okay, the parameters, the member functions were also depending upon the number of in the calling function, depending upon the number of parameters, okay, the call functions were also called the same way. Okay, the function body were also called in the same way. So that way we would see that using the same function name, okay, and with different parameter types, it the reusability of the member function was found to be means like very effective. And then also we could adjust the number of parameters also. So in yesterday's program we saw that it may be that uh, we could relate with a real world problem, right, where we can change the employee code, suppose e code, right? Not all the employee codes will be same. The e name, maybe it may be same, maybe not different, right? So that way we will change. So in here only the e code and e names remain the same, right? Were changed. The rest, the designation and the salary was changed in this member function, right? So like that, we saw the overloaded class member functions, right? And in yesterday's program also I discussed about this one, where we have the default argument, however it produced an error, right? Now the students, regarding the video quality, okay, it may not be that good, but that's why I always suggest you to keep your textbook ready, okay, near with you while watching these videos, okay, so that you my with my explanation and with my finger pointing wherever it's pointing, okay, you can compare that with your textbook, okay, and try to understand. So in the case of this, this is page number 1.154, okay. So that was using the default arguments, okay. But in this program you saw that when the object was declared, when the object got declared, that is first num, yeah, this one. So this is the class name, this is the object name, right? So when the object was declared, the constructor gets invoked automatically, right? So what constructor gets invoked automatically? The default constructor, right? Okay. Or in terms of the program, okay, if there's a parameterized constructor, or if depending upon which constructor is called, right? But in the case of this, two constructors are there. So this is the constructor with no arguments, okay. So this is the default constructor, and this is constructor that has parameter, so it has default argument, okay. So this is the parameterized constructor. So what happens is that when this object gets created, okay, it does not know which constructor to call, because there is no definite sign that it will call the default constructor or it will call the parameterized constructor, okay. So now in terms of default argument, okay, in this case the 10 is passed initialized to the variable num, right? So this is the default argument, right? So in terms of default argument, okay, it can also be considered as a default constructor, okay. A default constructor is usually a constructor that declares no parameter, but yes, it can also declare parameter provided it passes default arguments, okay. So in this case also, this can also be a default constructor also, okay. If there is no any default constructor declared, then this can also be the default constructor, okay. The first thing is that if there are no constructors invoked, okay, the compiler will automatically create the default constructor, okay. So default constructor is usually actually a null constructor, okay. So it can be called without having to provide any arguments, okay. So in this case no arguments are provided, right? So it is irrespective of whether the constructor is auto generated or user defined, okay. So if that means if no constructors are declared, it is auto generated, okay. Or if the constructors default constructor is declared, that means it is user defined. In that case, in the default constructor body, okay, some default values will be assigned, okay. So if the constructors have parameters, okay, like in this case, but they have default values, then keep in mind that they can also be a default constructor, okay. So default constructor, it provides the default values. What it does, it provides default values like 0, okay, to the object data members like 0, or in case like null values, okay. So those are that is the purpose of default constructor, okay. So in the case of this particular program, constructor overloading, okay, here you can see, like any other function, a constructor can also be overloaded with more than one function that have the same name. So just like function overloading, okay, and we have seen that in constructor and destructor, this one, okay, the class member function can also be overloaded, okay. So in this particular, in this yesterday's program, in this particular program, we saw not the constructor but the member function, okay. We saw not the constructor but the member function. This is the constructor, right? This is the constructor function body, but the member function overloaded, okay. So class method 1, that is the member function 1, member function 2, member function 3, like that. This is the member function name, right? So the same member function was called again and again, was reused again and again, but how? Depending on the number of parameters that were declared, so based on that, that particular member function was called, okay. So similarly, it is also possible to overload a constructor, to reuse the same constructor, okay. Since constructor is a member function, to use the same constructor name again and again, okay. So more than one function that have the same name but different types or number of parameters. So the types could be different, that means the data type, return type, okay, or the number of parameters, okay. Like in the previous example, one have 4 parameters, another had 3 parameters, another had 2 parameters, like that, okay. So same way it could also be applied to the constructor, okay. So what is different between a constructor and this member function? Okay, constructor name is same to a class name, okay. Constructor does not have return type. Member functions uh, name is different from a class name. Member functions have return type. It can be void, it can be integer, float, anything, okay. So same program, okay. Remember that for overloaded functions, okay, the compiler will call the one whose parameter match the arguments used in the function call. So which what it means that for this constructor overloading, okay, the compiler will call which constructor. Is it the default constructor? There's only one default constructor in a class, okay. So will it be the default constructor? Will it be the parameterized constructor? Will it be the copy constructor? Which constructor will it call? So it depends on, okay, or in the case of parameterized constructor, which parameterized constructor is it calling, right? So it depends on the number of parameters that are declared, okay, or that are defined, okay, and then the number of arguments used in the calling function. That means it may be implicit call, it may be explicit call, okay. It may be implicit call by the object, or it may be explicit call by the constructor itself in the main function, that is in the calling function, okay. So it depends on that. Clear? So in the case of constructor which are automatically called when an object is created, the one executed is the one that matches the argument passed to on the object declaration, okay. So just what I've explained, okay. So when multiple constructors has to be called, okay, or what we do is that we have to find the best match, okay. That is from if you remember the object or oriented concepts, finding the best match solution, right? Okay, depending on the type, depending on the number of parameters, depending on the argument type, like that, okay. So here also in constructor overloading, the same concept is applied here. So this is same, right? We have the class name employee, the private access specifier, the data members, okay. And then so we have these are the data members, the private data members that are declared. I'm sure that now you're familiar with all of this, okay. We have the public member functions declaration. This is the member function void display, okay, to display. And then this is your default constructor, and this is your parameterized constructor declaration, okay. So you have your default constructor declared, and then you have a parameterized constructor declared, okay. Now in the main function, okay, in the main function you have, so what was the problem that was faced in the previous program, okay, when in this program, that is having the default argument, when one you have default constructor and one you have parameterized constructor, right? Which one will it call? So that problem solution was overcome using this constructor overloading by declaring two objects. So you have two constructors, so you have two objects, right? Because uh, one object will call one constructor, another object will call another constructor, okay. So here you can see that in the main function, the class employee declares or initialize, okay, uh, two objects. One is emb1 and the other one is emb2, separate by commas, okay. What is the difference between these two objects? In the first, you have a normal object declaration. In the second, you have an implicit call to a constructor by the object emb2, okay. So in the first case, this is a normal object declaration, right? Okay, so the class declares this object. So what do you think will be called? Keep in mind that when an object gets declared, the constructor gets invoked immediately, right? Which type of constructor? The default constructor. So in this case, when this object is created, it calls the default constructor, which is this one, okay. Outside of the class, okay, using the scope resolution operator, the class employee, okay, the class employee uh, defines this constructor, the default constructor, okay. So this default constructor function body is is here, okay. So what happens is that, how do we know this is default constructor? Because it passes no it declares no parameter, it passes no argument, right? It accepts no argument in this case. So this is your call function, and this is when the object gets declared, this constructor, default constructor, gets invoked, okay. So in here you can see that, okay, the default constructor initialize the object data members using the default values. In the case of uh, integer data types, integer or real, okay, it will initialize to the value 0, okay. Or in the case of character or string values, right, it initialize to null strings, okay. So null value will be uh, initialized for the object data members, okay. So but the default constructor duty is, like I said, okay, default constructor, it provides default values to the object data members, so which is like 0 or which is like null values, okay. So in the case of employee name, employee designation, since it is character strings, right, so null value will be pass. Okay, so you can see that no garbage values get passed, okay, using the default constructor. So wrong info is not passed. Okay, so like I said, keep in mind that the object represents a real world, right? So in this case, emb1 represents a real world employee, right? So in that case, no garbage value of that employee will be initialized. Okay, so next, in the second case, emb2. Now emb2, here we have an implicit call to the parameterized constructor. As you can see, how do we know it is a parameterized constructor? Because the object's data, it gets initialized, right? So this value gets passed. So implicitly, indirectly, okay, it calls the parameterized constructor because it has arguments to be passed, right? So that's why the parameterized constructor gets invoked. That is, this is the call function, right? So this is the parameterized constructor body. So the 100, it passes to e code because it is integer type, right? Character e name, so Miss Sujata gets passed. Okay, so like that, all the four parameters uh, are passed. Okay, all the four arguments are passed to these parameters. Okay, and then after that, okay, similarly like in the previous programs, okay, from there it passes on to the data members employee code, okay, using the string manipulation function from e name to emb name, from e designation to emb designation, okay, e salary to emb salary. Okay, and then using the display member function, okay, the value gets displayed. Okay, so in this case, emb was declared without any argument, so it has been initialized with constructor that has no parameter. Okay, so in the case of emb1, it got initialized with a constructor that had no parameters, no arguments was passed, right? So it initialized to the default value, that is 0 and null values for strings. Okay, then in the case of which initialize default values inside the employee, okay, constructor, but the emb1 was declared with four arguments initialized with respective parameters. So in the case of emb1, not emb1, see, yeah, the printing mistake. Okay, in the case of emb2, it was not, this is not emb1, okay, but emb2 was declared with four arguments. Okay, that is here. Okay, and then this was passed on, so that got passed to the object data members. Okay, so here you can see that proper uh, initialization of the object, that is emb1 and emb2, using the default constructor. Okay, in the first case, emb1 got initialized to that the object data members got initialized with the default value, that is 0 and null. In the second case, the parameter the emb2 data members object got initialized using these four arguments. Okay, so that value was passed to the data members. Okay, so this is how we do using constructor overloading. Okay, the program becomes much more, the complexity of program becomes much more easier. Okay, so hope that you have understood. Okay, if you have any doubts on this particular program, okay, you can message me. Okay, so yeah, so that will be for today. And there some of you have not still submitted the assignment. Okay, so I hope that you'll be submitting the assignment even though it is late, but like I said, better late than never. Okay, so you can inform your friends, those of you who are watching this video, you can inform your friends, okay, to submit the assignment. By that only I will know whether you are understanding the concept of this object oriented programming or not. Okay, and study hard for your online class exam. Okay, so it will be conceptual, keep in mind. Okay, it will be conceptual, so programs based on concept. Okay, so study hard on that. Yeah, so that will be for today.